Our story begins here in South Park, which is a neighborhood inside the Seattle metropolitan area. South Park has been historically home to lower class families, primarily of Latinx origins, and the neighborhood sits right next to the river that has been long forgotten but was essential to the creation of Seattle as we know it today, the Duwamish, which coincidentally sits right behind me. Unfortunately for this neighborhood, it doesn't have a high school to call its own, and instead the children are forced to go outside of the neighborhood to find schooling, which for some families is an impossible task. So in the 2010s, efforts were led mainly by the Duwamish River Community Coalition to fix that, and for years they were pushing for a school that this neighborhood could call its own. Across Elliott Bay, though, a similar idea was being formed for a new high school. But this one wouldn't be to help the people of South Park. It would be to help the old and aging maritime industry. You see, for a long time, there's been a growing need for new workers to come into the maritime industry. But that just hasn't been happening recently. So the Port of Seattle and the Northwest Maritime Center and various other organizations connected to the maritime industries of Seattle came together and decided on a solution to create a high school solely focused on the maritime industry to get young people excited and to provide that next generation of workers. In 2019, both parties came together along with several other maritime stakeholders to combine the two ideas. This new high school would be one for the maritime industry and for South Park. So, in February 2020, they created a 16-page document called A Changing Tide that would outline what would later become Although Maritime High School was originally intended to be in South Park had no facility to house such a high school. So instead, it had to go somewhere else for its first few years of operation. Some ideas were thrown out. Like, for example, one of them was for it to be on a riverboat in the Duwamish River. But none of those ideas ever went through, and instead, Maritime High School opened in 2021 right here at the Olympic campus in Des Moines, Washington. Far from the intended location, but it's a suitable interim site while plans are being created for the final high school in South Park. But Maritime High School students are often not even here. You'll find them all over the Puget Sound instead, whether they're on the school's boat to Admiral Jack learning vessel operations, or at the Manchester Research Station learning the impacts of ocean acidification on shellfish. And Maritime High School students are allowed to do this because of a unique take on learning called hands-on learning. But before I talk a bit more about that, let me go somewhere a bit more comfortable. There we go. That's a bit better. This type of learning model came mainly from schools like Raisbeck Aviation, Big Picture, and the New York Harbor School. The idea is simple. Get kids out of the box and allow them to see the world, meet, network, and explore their passions.
So project-based learning, mastery-based learning, it better maps to the reality of working on a ship than anything else, any other kind of learning I can imagine. So there's this phrase between mariners, I think it goes, the sea finds out what you did wrong, which for me means like, it doesn't matter if you got a grade, like if you can't do the thing you got the grade for, like the sea's gonna find out. And so I think like that's a little bit of a metaphor for life, and that this type of learning is so good in general, but in specific to an environment that is, it holds you accountable. I wouldn't say it's unforgiving, but it holds you accountable. And it feels like between the experience of the district, the experience of the Maritime Center, and just the reality of the environment, like this is the perfect way to move forward with maritime education?
So I definitely believe in hands-on learning. For me, I believe that being able to apply something and physically see it in front of you is kind of more authentic for the student and for everyone else in the community, especially when it comes to things that are connected to the community. For example, like the Duwamish River, we did a lot of water quality back in the spring with freshmen about that. So having them understand like how their sciences that they're doing in the classroom applies into the real world and helps community kind of benefit from that data is really important for students to understand, and helps them understand the importance of impact as well. So some students, for example, if you're in a traditional high school, you're learning about chemistry and you're understanding like your periodic table and all of those basics, but you're not understanding how those things play a role and impact the environment and how it can impact you or your community as well. So for example, with aquaculture, we kind of dived into some basic chemistry around how the pH and salinity and all those water qualities would affect shellfish companies. So being able to apply that and see how that applies, I feel is really beneficial.
I think it is so important to get students into the real world. I think it's so important to expose students to a wide range of different opportunities, both businesses, locations. I know even we did a lot at the waterfront, and there were several students who hadn't really been to the waterfront before. So just getting students familiar with local places, getting students familiar with local businesses, introducing them to industry partners and leaders, I think it's huge. And I think a lot of learning takes place outside of the classroom. So I think that's a really integral part of Maritime.
Students on campus also use hands-on learning by taking the information they learned outside of the classroom and using it to enhance the learning inside the campus. And that learning inside the campus is just as unique and engaging as outside of it. At Maritime, a system known as project-based learning is put into place here. The idea is, instead of having students go from history to math to science and learn completely different things, all the students' classes are connected to a quarter-long project. These projects are large in scale and in most cases feature community outreach to solve problems, scientific data collection, deep dives into the topic from a STEM or humanities perspective, and a final product demonstration piece where students are given the opportunity to present their learning to the maritime industry stakeholders, their families, and fellow peers. So far, Maritime has had 8 of these projects. They have ranged from analyzing the community on the Duwamish River and its history, to students creating a Shark Tank-style pitch on their made-up shellfish companies.
Yeah, so I think the quarter-long projects, when I started here at the beginning of this year, actually in the summer when we started talking about this, we had maritime leaders from last year had worked with our partners and had come up with a 2-year scope and sequence of the topics and subjects that they wanted covered during that 2-year period. And so we kind of knew the content, so it would be, we were going to do aquaculture. And that was it. There's your topic and some ideas or resources. We knew we'd do logistics and container ships, but that was it. So it took a process, meeting often with, always with other teachers and other stakeholders at Maritime, often with industry partners and people. So marine construction, we met with JC at Pacific Pound Marine to come up with ideas. So really it starts as a brainstorm. What do we want to cover? And working with Northwest Maritime Center, we were able to put together integrated planners. We just started that actually a little late in the year, the second quarter, but really trying to just have a project that extends beyond just STEM or just humanities, really trying to make it an integrated quarter where the things that we're doing in one class is complemented by what we're doing in another class. And so really it's a lot of brainstorming, a lot of late nights between me and Ms. Rodriguez, trying to get stuff figured out, and sometimes last minute, and sometimes it's this isn't working, let's move in this direction. So there's also a lot of flexibility and sometimes go with the flow just to see how students are responding. Usually we have the project in mind at the end, we knew we wanted to do aquaculture, we wanted to do a business plan, Shark Tank style. So that one, we then backwards plan to be okay, in order to do a business plan, they need to see some business plans. They need to have a pitch. They need to be able to present. So we kind of backwards plan from there to get to that point.
In these projects, students are given immense resources to explore their main topic theme, For the most recent project on marine construction, students were tasked to redesign the torn-down Pier 63 on the Seattle waterfront. Students went to an architecture firm named Methuen to learn the art of model building, and they were given access to a tour from Pacific Pile to learn the finer details of marine construction. Students are also set up with mentors and are given the opportunity to meet multiple mentors with immense experience in the maritime industry in the 10th grade who help the students' projects on the side and advise them on potential career pathways. In these quarters, multiple minor assignments are given to students which involve more learning and test their abilities to know the basic knowledge on a subject. And there are also bigger milestone assignments that test the students' abilities more. For example, sticking to that marine construction project I mentioned earlier, students had to create a budget plan for their pier and had to do a community survey to see what people wanted to see on the waterfront. Every quarter, students are tasked to create something to showcase to a live audience that shows their learning. These range from simple slideshow presentations to massive trifolds with multiple artifacts from the quarter and even what you're watching right now.
I think it's a really great way to learn, just because we get to do this thing the entire quarter and all of it ends up becoming this tangible product and something that we can show off and be like, oh, I'm proud that I did this.
Personally, I prefer more project-based learning, and I kind of always have been. It's just really nice to be able to make something with your own two hands and see the results in front of you. And it's just a very fulfilling feeling, not just being defined by a grade, but by your actual work.
These massive projects test students on multiple levels, including their communication skills, their ability to work as a team, engineering skills, and following scientific processes. But despite that, some of the most impactful and important learning happens when the waters have calmed and the project ends. In your typical high school, a big project will come back with a letter grade, a character, a symbol of success or failure. There is no time for the student to reflect on what they did wrong if they got an F, and there is no incentive for students to push the boundaries of their learning for those who succeeded. Maritime breaks down that notion with a style of grading called the competencies. There are 7 unique competencies, which are maritime leadership, communication, design thinking, scientific reasoning, mathematical reasoning, social reasoning, and wellness. Each of these has subcategories that break down the competencies, making it easier for students to understand. For example, in the competency of maritime leadership, there are the subcompetencies of career planning, professional habits and skills, and informed ethical and decision making. The competencies get kids to learn real-life skills that students demonstrate in the real world, not just on tests. Students must demonstrate the competencies yearly through quarter-long projects and other major work inside and outside of class.
They show us exactly what we're trying to do, whereas a letter grade is just, it's a letter floating in space. But I feel like if we see the competencies, we can say, oh, this project ties into that. And this is how I learned through that project how to get to that competency.
After these projects, students show they have mastered each competency through their presentation of learning, or POLs. These POLs have teachers, mentors, peers, and parents watch. After which, if given the green light by the teachers, the students are allowed to use a program called Mastery Transcript to make a semi-resume/portfolio showing their learning and the competencies they mastered with evidence to showcase this. This will be sent off to colleges once completed and forces colleges to look past students' grades and test scores and look at exactly what they have done. A similar system was implemented at Big Picture with great success. The competencies also challenge students to reflect on their learning instead of being told everything they did wrong by teachers. Students are told the mistakes they made and are given the resources to fix these mistakes and turn them into learning experiences.
I think the pros are students definitely understand what skills they come up with or what they bring to the table when they first start here in Maritime, and what are some of those next steps that they need to be able to reach the mastery of that skill, that competency. So it helps them kind of individualize their learning and understand and pull pieces from different projects. So not every student is going to master a certain skill with the same project as their peer. It's kind of more of like their individual growth and understanding of the project and the authenticity of what the project is holding with the community. One of the downsides is because a lot of our students are coming from comprehensive schools, they kind of have a hard time grasping what it means to master a skill or a competency or understanding versus getting a letter grade. So I know freshman year, a lot of students were like, well, what is my grade? What do I have in this class? And so trying to dismantle that understanding of like, I'm only a number or I'm only a letter for students was kind of a challenge in the beginning, but I think once students start understanding, oh, this is me of who I am as an individual and what skills I'm bringing to the table and what I can come out of my own product, is kind of definitely a bit more of a strategy I feel is better for students.
Those life skills are just as important, if not more important, because it's such a global world now. You communicate via people all over the world for a variety of jobs, and so you need skills that are going to allow you that collaborative piece with a lot of people. Gone are just singular jobs in which you do by yourself. You really need the ability to work with people and to work with people in a collaborative way to get things done.
A con with going a competency-based system is that students are not always used to not getting a letter grade, and that can be a huge, I feel like there's this really sticky period in between where students are like often students are driven by that letter grade. It's an A, that's what I'm going for, even though it can be arbitrary and like A's can just be handed out for, turning something in. So I think a con is that it can take a little while for students to get used to the system, but once they recognize like their learning matters, I think it's a more holistic way of a more holistic approach for students to be looking at, like, once again, like I said before, what they learned, not just what they did. I think it provides more ownership for students, not only to take part of their work, but often there's like a revision process throughout that too, where it's like, this is good work, but this isn't excellent work. So I think it pushes students to continue to work towards excellence rather than just turning something in to turn it in. I also think this is more like the real world. Most people at their jobs don't get an A or a B for doing a good job, but they get real feedback and real input and have real answers besides just a letter grade on how they did. So I think it turns students into more than just a letter or a GPA. And also like opens it up. I feel like there's more equity. There's students that come into the school that like may have been failing at other schools I've seen students have a lot of success that goes beyond just a grade because now they're viewed as a whole student.
I think letter grades are important, but they are by far the end all to be all. I think looking at a variety of things, standardized tests, yes. Report cards and letter grades, yes, but also the work that the student does within the classroom, the assignments, the projects, the conversations that you have with the students. Just sometimes students are put into this box of this is how education is, and they kind of get trapped, and I don't think that always is best for all kids. And not every child is going to fit into a box and has to meet those requirements.
I think reflecting on learning is a really big importance for students, especially because in traditional schools, students don't have time to reflect on what they learn to build and grow from that kind of experience. So I think reflecting on past experiences to kind of hone their skills and get better at it is something that they need to kind of understand as an independent learner to help achieve their full potential. So for example, if they're doing a presentation and they felt like their presentation was not as good, they kind of reflect and see what are some of those things that I can do, or what that feedback I received from my teacher or my peers can improve on the next time. And so having them continually reflect as a learner helps them grow as a person as well, and understand like where they're growing as their strength and what are some maybe those weaknesses that they kind of need help supporting, whether needing support from an adult or something from their peers that can help them build up that skill.
Maritime isn't perfect though. Especially in its first year, Maritime had no after-school clubs, math curriculum, or foreign language program when it first launched. There was small Lashutsi language lessons every day. However, the lessons were limited in scope and were never intended to be a fully fledged out foreign language program. The projects, which were supposed to be one of the big highlights of the school, were not fully thought out, and students didn't really understand the idea of them. Some students were extremely frustrated with their current situation, and 10 students left the school in the first year. And the school still has a limited math and Spanish curriculum, which they have struggled to tie into the integrated projects.
Yeah, so the first year here, it was kind of all over the place. I do feel like it wasn't extremely organized. I think like, obviously you're starting a new school, like there's gonna be things that don't get worked out yet, and like it's a learning process along the way. And I think like this year it's been so much better because I think like the staff have learned from their mistakes, and like the things that they overlooked last year, I think they've tried really hard to make work better this year. And then also just like from a student perspective too, like there was stuff that we kind of missed or like wasn't explained to us, and I think they've been doing a better job of that.
I guess symbolism that we used a lot last year was we were building the boat as it was floating, or like as it was going. So as teachers, we were kind of stumbling on what were some things that worked well with students, some things that didn't. And for me personally, I did a lot of reflection with students to see like, okay, how did this project go, or how did this lesson go, to kind of get feedback for the next set of students or even for the next project.
Despite that, Maritime has been willing to make changes and constantly take students' feedback to make schedules and curriculum changes. In fact, the push for a math and Spanish class was led largely by the student body, and we can see those changes in action in the jump from the first to the second year. Students had access to math and Spanish class, a counselor and dean were hired, and students got to go on an all expenses paid for trip on the schooner Zodiac, which for many was the highlight of the year for almost all the students. As Maritime has grown, it has introduced more offerings to students, such as an Associated Student Body, or ASB, for all students to participate in setting up school dances, fundraisers, and a potential trip to Port Townsend for next year's students. Maritime is also home to the award-winning MHS ROV Club, which has raised over $7,500 and won the 2022 MATE Regional Competition for the Navigator class, and is training the next generation of engineers. The club has also done significant outreach with its ROV in a Bag program, teaching 4th and 5th grade students at Highline Virtual Elementary the basics of ROVs.
So this year, we kind of took a lot of that input from students from last year into this year, and be able to create more authentic projects that a lot of students like you liked a lot more. It was more hands-on, it was more connected to the FWEs, which is the fieldwork experiences, and to the learning in the classroom. So we did take a lot more time this past summer to kind of solidify a little bit more concrete projects for you all compared to how last year was, when we were trying to figure out what the themes were going to be, getting a lot of input from project design leads, from like industry, trying to fit their needs as well within that first year.
Maritime is open to people of all creeds and backgrounds and is dedicated to making a safe space for all. The school has a Queer Straight Alliance Club dedicated to helping and giving a safe space for those in the LGBTQ+ community, and frequently the school informs students about different cultures and backgrounds to break down stereotypes and racist thinking. We have weekly assemblies to build community across the grade levels, and we also have a crew structure where students spend most of their school day, including fieldwork experiences with a specific cohort of peers, which builds trust, almost like a family.
I do want to say that we are inclusive in relation to culture and race. So we do try to introduce students to different various cultures around the maritime theme, and also introducing them to the industry as well, how there is a large population of the maritime industry that's more male, white dominant. So we do want to introduce students to become more diverse in that community as well. So introducing them to, for example, Sea Potential, which is an organization around students of color, kind of supporting them in that aspect as well. So we do try to include and have them partner up with people to become more inclusive in the maritime industry.
I think the culture and community at Maritime is pretty good so far. It reminds me a lot of back when I was in elementary school, when all my classes were really small with like 19 students, and everyone kind of knew each other, even if they weren't friends, and like the teacher was also kind of like our friend in a way as well.
I do like love the community here at Maritime High School. We all like lift each other up, and we all support each other. Like for instance, if someone's not doing well on assignment, there will always be someone that like can come in and be like, okay, well, I'll help you explain it. Like, for instance, at one point, when my group for a previous project was lagging behind, another person from another group came in and helped us out. And stuff like that happens all the time here at Maritime.
Yeah, I would say my experience has been mostly positive. I think that the staff and like the teachers have been a really welcoming community, and also just like being at such a small school, getting to know a lot of people, I think has really been nice, because it means that you know everyone and everyone's kind of, maybe not your best friend, but like you're acquainted.
One reason that MHS can focus on each student individually is because the school is so small. MHS is only home to around 80 students, and it is designed intentionally that way. But why? Well, fewer students means more time can be spent individually on each student. This gives students who need additional support to get the resources that they need, and it gives gifted students the opportunity to push their learning to the absolute limit. MHS also has several support teachers on site to help students with unique learning disabilities.
I am a huge supporter of small schools, and maybe I have bias because I've only taught in small schools, but I think like building relationships and connections with students is huge, where students can learn how to build those communication skills and learn how to talk to adults, learn how to, like I mentioned before, advocate for themselves, and just be focused on learning, not just doing, like not just doing a worksheet, but actually learning from the material or the projects.
To me, the best environment is one in which it's based on relations. I think students excel at school if they know that there's people in the school who care about them. So it's making connections with the students. The nice thing about our school is that we're sort of on the small side, and so there's an opportunity for you to really get to know the students on a personal level. And I think when you have a relationship between the student and the teacher, I also take the time to get to know the parents, and so when you have a relationship between the students and the parents and the teacher, then it sort of creates this camaraderie amongst everybody to work together. And I think the best environment has to be those relationships that are made. It just can't be people going to school to learn and then that's it, and then that's the end of them. And I think what we really focus on, and what I try to focus on, is making sure the students feel safe at school, but also that there's somebody at school who they believe is in their corner.
It definitely gives a more individualized approach to learning. It gives staff the opportunity to kind of connect more one-on-one with students. Some comments that I've noticed students have said in the past, or even when I was in middle school, was sometimes students get lost in the shuffle when they're in a big school. They kind of lose that support or that connection, and they kind of just pass on by and graduate. But here at Maritime, since you have a smaller population, we get to know the student individually, we get to know their personalities, we get to know their strengths and weaknesses, kind of aligning with our Highline model, right? Knowing students by name, strength, and need. So having a smaller school, we're able to apply that motto and that mission to our individual students, tailoring those projects. For example, in quarter 4, they're doing their own individual projects, so they're kind of honing their own skills and what their interests are in the school versus like in a community school where it's like larger and they kind of get lost. So that's why I think a smaller community is definitely beneficial. There are some downsides, so we are kind of like a family here, so of course there's going to be some struggle with like confrontation and conflicts, but also that kind of helps with being able to remediate and kind of solve those issues in a smaller scale.
I think it's definitely better because we're such a small school. We get to get to know more people, and I think that brings the whole school together. Whereas like at my old school, there's like 500 students, and like some of them are 5, some of them are 13. So like there was not very much blending going on, and like I didn't even know the people in my own class sometimes.
Ever since its inception, Maritime High School has been focused on creating the maritime industry jobs of the future, which is needed now more than ever. The Census Bureau in 2016 stated that in Washington state, 1/3 of the 6,000 maritime workers working in the transportation industry are older than 55. Right now, 2/5 of employees on ferries are ready to retire, along with 88% of ferry captains. This is, needless to say, extremely worrying when you take into consideration the fact that 90% of the goods you get come on boats from overseas, and thousands of people in Seattle rely on the ferry system to get to school or work. And these jobs aren't undesirable either, especially when you take into consideration the pay grade for some of these positions. In Washington, the mean salary is just around $52,000. Compare this to the maritime industry, which has a mean salary of $70,800, and captains make a mean of $84,000, according to the Seattle Times and the Port of Seattle. And these jobs are often completely invisible to students in general education. So, hopefully Maritime High School can work to fix this growing problem in the maritime industry. And history has shown that educating people has worked to fix that problem. Vigor Industrial ran a test in 2013 to see if they could lower the average age of people they hired. They worked with South Seattle College to open a center on Harbor Island to train potential new workers. After the program finished, they hired mostly from the program, and their average hiring age in just 6 years dropped from 54 to 46, showing access to maritime education can get younger people excited about maritime. Additionally, partnering with the racially and culturally diverse Highline School District, the goal is to allow for students from backgrounds underrepresented or historically excluded from maritime to gain greater access to this important sector. MHS is currently 50% students of color and 50% LGBTQ+ community, and non-binary identifying, which are identities the maritime industry needs to embrace if it's going to solve its workforce woes. So there is hope for this long-standing industry. Hopefully MHS can fill that gap. So another question I have, in 10 to 20 years, what do you hope to be the legacy of Maritime High School? What is like the ultimate goal of the school?
That's a great question. I think of Maritime High School as a good start, because I think in 10 to 20 years, Maritime High School will be resoundingly successful if students like yourselves have been successful in their lives, but also that the enthusiasm and the opportunities that Maritime High School is really helping to catalyze can grow throughout the region. And we're starting to see that now, but like I can see, I don't even have to squint too hard at the future. Like I can see it in 10 to 20 years where there's a network of maritime high schools or maritime middle schools, or just a bunch of ways that students are getting connected to the sea and the maritime environment, the opportunity of the industry, and that the students that have gone through, like yourselves in the early waves, can come back and mentor and really be the examples for the students to follow.
Maritime has shown in its first 2 years that it is ready and able to create that next diverse generation to replace the old and retiring members of the workforce. Through its unique learning model, students are given the opportunities that other kids could only dream of through FWEs, the competency system, and the unique community built at MHS. The future looks bright for the maritime industry and the entire world. Thank you for watching. My name is Zane Glantz, and remember everyone, always stay classy.